Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, WKYT Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey will give us an explanation of how he arrived at his winter forecast as we certainly feel the chill this weekend. Chris Bailey talks about the colder months ahead and his bold prediction. That's coming up a little bit later. But first, Kentucky's Democratic Party has a new chairman, and he says his goal is to return the party to the people. Kentucky Democrats were dominant for generations. As late as the early 2000s, Democrats controlled all statewide offices in Kentucky, including governor. It had been 35 years since they had lost a constitutional race. Both U.S. senators were Democrats in the early 80s, but Senator Wendell Ford's re-election in 1992 is the last time a Democrat won a U.S. Senate race in Kentucky. That's now been a quarter of a century ago. Times have changed. Kentucky Democrats find themselves on the outside looking in many cases. Republicans control the legislature, the governorship, the congressional delegation, and they're busy preparing for the 2018 major local and legislative races. But Democrats are saying, hold on. They have chosen Ben Self as their new chairman. He has family roots in Pike County. He went to school in Lexington, then on to MIT, and he started a bustling Lexington business that helped usher in the microbrewery boom that we see these days. He's co-founder of West 6th Brewery. Mr. Chairman, welcome. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on your selection. So it is not lost on anybody that you punch several holes here in the ticket. Roots in eastern Kentucky, live in an urban area, have that MIT degree. You've come home, you started a business. What led you to the thinking that it would be a good idea to try to lead a major political party in the Commonwealth?
Well, for me, it was really driven by two big things. The first was that our state right now, and with the Republican leadership, is headed in the wrong direction. And it's really sad as someone who loves the state and who wants to live the rest of his life here in Kentucky and who hopes that, I hope my kids will be able to live here their entire lives as well. But with the direction that the Republicans are taking it, there won't be any jobs for them. Our public education system will be destroyed. And we just won't be a very diverse or welcoming state anymore at all.
Tell us how your background, you believe, will be helpful in your efforts to get the Democrats on the right track as you see it.
Yeah, so that really gets to the second reason that I really wanted to get involved, which was the fact that the Democratic Party here in the state, the Kentucky Democratic Party, is really ready for some big changes. As you just mentioned, you know, we're in a rough shape in a lot of our elected officials right now, not holding the governorship or the state house. And so when I was considering whether or not to put my name in for this, the big question that I had was there an appetite to do something really, really new there and to really reinvent what the party does and how it campaigns?
We hear that there are local Democratic parties out there who simply have not heard from the state Democratic Party in maybe years. There's some who were considered contacts out in the state some years ago.
Yeah, I think that I've heard that as well as part of this process, and honestly, we've already even started on this to help solve this problem. Last Tuesday, we held a conference call with all the county party chairs, and we'll continue traveling and getting beyond just the metro areas of Lexington and Louisville and Frankfort to really reach out to Democrats all across the state.
Democrats still hold a registration advantage in Kentucky. So, Chairman Self, it takes Democrats to elect Republicans in Kentucky. We hear so often Kentucky Democrats say that the party has left them. What do you say to that?
Well, I would disagree with that, and I would understand why they're saying that, but really what it's about is we've stopped talking about our core beliefs as Democrats. You know, we really strongly believe that no person in the state, Democrat or Republican, should die for lack of access to health care, that everyone who works a job should make enough money to put food on their table and a roof above their head, save a little money for retirement and go on vacation every once in a while. And as Democrats, we really need to get back to those beliefs. Those are the same beliefs that we've believed for hundreds of years. We just need to get back to talking about them more, and I'm excited to help lead that charge.
Wendell Ford, the former governor, former U.S. senator, used to say that there is a national Democratic Party and there is a Kentucky Democratic Party. Do you think that distinction still needs to exist for Democrats to gain ground here in Kentucky?
You know, it's really tough for that difference to exist because everything has become so national in our news and in our politics. You know, I think that obviously there are areas where our state is more conservative than the National Democratic Party, but we really share those same beliefs, those beliefs that Everyone should fundamentally have equal access to opportunity, that we all should have access to good jobs, that we should have enough money to be able to go to the doctor when we need to, and that unifies us nationally at the national party as well here at the state.
When you see emphasis of issues, though, you see a situation like in Virginia, where Democrats have obviously just won the governorship, have made strides in the state legislature over there, and some of what was said was the candidates fit the electorate. Do Kentucky Democrats need to be very careful to do that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the strong things that I've said so far is that we need to compete, in every single district out there in Kentucky, and that means from school board and PVA all the way up to the governorship and our congressional delegation. But we need to encourage new folks to run as well. There are plenty of seats out there that have had no Democratic challenger for a long time. And those might even be viewed as unwinnable seats. If you look at what happened in Oklahoma this last week, there was a seat that Donald Trump won by almost 40 points, that a 26-year-old, little-known candidate won for the state Senate this week. And that's, almost a 40-some point swing that happened in that race. And that's with somebody who wasn't a traditional candidate, that would not have normally been encouraged to run. So, I definitely would encourage anyone out there who's thinking this is the year to do it, throw your hat in the ring and run.
Do you think it's difficult for some to see a candidate within themselves?
I think it's absolutely the case, and I think there's lots of interesting research out there that shows that's particularly different even for men versus women. Women have to be encouraged a lot more that they are absolutely viable candidates and should be throwing their hats into the race more. And so we just need to, as a party, part of what we need to do is both encourage folks to throw their names in and show them why they could be a viable candidate and then be a great member of whatever elected official they want to be, and then provide them with the resources to actually get that done.
How hard is it, though, to get people to consider public service when they know what's coming? They know that, we live in a time when there's so much animosity and the talk is so rough in these elections, and somebody's going to go back and find out what happened in the 7th grade, and there they're laid bare.
Well, there is no doubt that it is a sacrifice, and there are plenty of people who do it for lots of different reasons. But particularly when you start talking at the state or at the local level, it's a lot of work for very little pay in many cases and very little rewards. And so it is a community service that folks need to think about it. But it's more important now than ever before. And yes, it's a sacrifice, but Kentuckians, we're used to making sacrifices all the time. People make sacrifices for their families all the time. And it's just thinking about that as you've got to step forward to help make the state a better place. I mean, looking at what's happening here in the state and nationwide, there's no better time.
You are choosing to lead a political party at a time when it seems that more people are driven away from political parties. They see them as, money-grubbing, divisive forces that have extremists as their key members out there. More people will tell you that they identify more as independent. Do you think it's important that the political parties continue to exist? They're not in the Constitution, as you know.
No, I'm absolutely a strong believer that a strong Democratic Party is the way that we can help make a significant change in the state. And I would say to those folks who've written off the party that I'm a little bit different than your average chairman or chairperson. I have a different set of experiences, and I really believe that we're going to build a new type of Kentucky Democratic Party that can be inclusive of a lot of those folks that might have otherwise not been included.
Which brings up the elephant in the room, if I may say, in a discussion with a Democrat. Kentucky Democrats have obviously had a difficult time relating to the rural areas in the state recently. One of your candidates for Congress here in central Kentucky, Senator Reggie Thomas, said that. He said, we don't speak the language out in Kentucky. How does the Kentucky Democratic Party address this distinct urban-rural divide?
Well, to me, that's all about jobs and an economic message, and that's really the core about what we're about as Democrats. And so, yes, there are certain issues that the Republican Party loves to talk about to try to divide us as Democrats, but really what we need to be talking about is the issue that matters most to people, which is jobs, about growth, about having future economic opportunity, about having access to health care, not worrying about if mom or dad gets sick, what are you going to do as a family? Those are the kinds of issues that really resonate everywhere in Kentucky. They're common issues.
You come at this as a businessman with that background, and the Republicans claim they are the party of business. How do you make the argument that Democrats can be business friendly?
Well, I think that the idea that the Republican Party is the party of business is not true at all. I mean, we're the party in more cases of small business. You look at this tax plan that the Republicans are proposing nationwide, it's going to hurt your small businesses out there a lot more than anyone out there is really talking about right now. Sure, they're the party of the big businesses, of the Goldman Sachs, of the ones that are really the top 1%. They're definitely looking out for the wealthiest Americans. There's no doubt about it if you look at this tax plan. I think what we're about is your small businesses, your small mom and pop restaurants and convenience stores and things like that really make up the backbone of a lot of these communities out there in Kentucky.
But in many cases there are regulations that the Democratic Party has been more favorable toward. Do you think that, for instance, the dropping of regulations on some environmental regulations may have helped the coal mining industry in eastern Kentucky?
I think that is there are lots of factors that contribute to that, and there's no doubt about it. But what we've really got to focus on here is the future of the economy in a lot of these communities. I've met with a lot of them, even in my role as a brewery owner. Lots of communities out there saying, hey, come open a brewery in my particular town, and because they view that as a kind of entrepreneurship activity that can bring a different type of manufacturing job back to those communities, and they're just desperate for any kind of opportunity out there. I think entrepreneurship is absolutely the future of the economy in lots of these areas, and we have to be really encouraging of that, and that's the economic message that we need to be talking about.
We're with the brand new chairman of the Kentucky Democratic Party, Ben Self, on Kentucky Newsmakers, and we're going to come back in just a moment. He left Kentucky a few years. What was it like when he came back? We're going to talk about that, and Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey looks ahead to the winter a little bit later on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back now to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We are visiting with the new Democratic Party chairman, Ben Self, and we are learning more about what his plans are for the party that is the majority party in registration, but by far the minority party in Frankfort and in offices held. Is that difficult? I mean, how does that sit with you when you look at that?
Well, I think what it says to us is there's a ton of opportunity out there, and that's what's one of the things that's really exciting about the future of the party. When we really reform and we start to reconnect to the grassroots and really start speaking about things that they care about, they do have that base in the Democratic Party, and so I think it'll be really easy to bring them back home. You
were a star student over at Dunbar, went to MIT, spent some years away from Kentucky, including in Washington, and then you came back. Did you find Kentucky the same kind of place in those years? Was progress made, or is that some of your concern?
No, I mean, I think absolutely, and Kentucky and there's lots of exciting things that are happening in the state and lots of hope for the future. I think some of the time I spent away really opened my eyes to what we can become even more so, and what having a strong small business culture can do for these economies.
As you look at the issue set and you begin to talk with candidates for next year, you have identified, and you said, jobs and the economy, and that's what you mostly will emphasize. But will you ask them up and down as a litmus test their stands on some of the issues?
No, I don't. It's not the job of the party necessarily to tell each candidate what they can or cannot believe. Each one of our candidates representing different communities out there needs to represent their communities and may have different values that don't necessarily agree with us. We are the big tent party. We're the party that's inclusive of everyone. The other side is all top down. They're the party of the president tells everyone else what they have to do. And we're seeing that more so right now than ever before.
You brought up the president. President Trump remains the most popular political figure tested in polling in Kentucky right now. You got 66% of the vote here in the 2016 election. Approval, the Big Red poll by Western Kentucky University, I think had at the top approval at 50%. How much of a factor is that in the Democrats trying to get a footing here?
What that really says to me is that people are tired of the normal faces they see in politics. And to me, that was much more a vote about, and I think we saw this in the governor's race as well, about bringing in someone who's new, someone who's an outsider, and encouraging them to try to take over the system or drain the swamp. I think unfortunately what we've seen is that's not what actually happens, that they quickly become insiders, and instead of trying to enact all this change they promised, basically going back to the same thing that the Koch brothers and the other wealthy donors who got them elected want them to do.
Where can the Democrats be competitive in Kentucky next year and in the year following that, which is the statewide elections?
Everywhere. I think what we saw in Virginia and what we saw in Oklahoma and all over the country is that Democrats can be competitive when we run great candidates in every single district across the state. I firmly believe that we have the best interests of everyone in mind, and as long as we can get out there and tell them that and be honest and transparent and open with folks, that we can win anywhere.
The House Minority Leader, Rocky Adkins, has predicted rather boldly on this program that Kentucky Democrats could recapture the state House next year. Would you think that's a likely scenario?
I think that's absolutely a likely scenario. I think there's a lot of excitement out there right now and a lot of momentum. You see this in the marches, you see this in the protests, you see this particularly when people are talking about this pension plan that the governor and the state legislature are trying to ram down people's throats, and it's just really got people excited and angry about things. How
would the Democrats be partners in trying to deal with this pension problem? Nobody denies that it exists, right?
No, absolutely. But I don't think that the proposal that the Republican Party has put forward and Governor Bevin has put forward actually makes a difference in it. And it definitely breaks our promise to all of our public workers, our teachers. And I mean, it's going to make it really hard to recruit new and talented teachers into a system.
Charter schools have been another issue that the Democrats have been loud about, but at the same time, one of the state's public universities operates the model lab school, and now it apparently is going to become the first school in the state to try to apply for a charter. Are charter schools an issue that Democrats win on by running against them?
You know, I think that's a very challenging issue, but the base of it, what the Republicans are trying to do is take money away from our teachers and our education system and funnel it into what are essentially can be private institutions running these charter schools. And you know, whether or not they're owned by that private institution, a lot of the money for the curriculum could go to that private institution as well. And you know, fundamentally, they haven't worked. There are some cases, obviously, where they have here and there, but as an overall arching theme, charter schools have not worked anywhere across the country, and it just don't need to hurt our education system here.
Democratic Secretary of State Allison Lundergan Grimes got out front this week on medical marijuana and says that she is forming a task force to push legislation. The Republicans quickly said, well, that's not in her scope of duties to take a stand on that issue. And you respond to that?
I mean, I think that Allison is showing some leadership in the state that is severely lacking on the other side of the aisle. She's a statewide elected official, and it's up to her to decide where she wants to focus and what things she wants to focus on and lead on in this state. And I think it's just exciting that someone out there has some new ideas to throw into the mix and that is willing to even sit down and talk about it.
We communicate in different ways these days. It is a very quick world. Yep. It's the story of the hour. Yep. Maybe the story every few minutes changes. A storyline or an outrage is out there. You have obviously been involved in social media since the beginning. How will you bring that to bear as the chairman of the Democratic Party in this state?
Yeah, I'm excited to make a lot of changes inside of the party, and one is building up a real digital infrastructure. You know, what were the traditional campaign techniques that worked in this state are going to change and have changed, and I'm really excited to catch the party up. I think that's building a real digital team. I think that's talking to people. At the core of that, that's really just talking to people about where they're at. And if they're on Facebook, that means talking to them there. If they're on Twitter, it's there. Through text messaging, whatever that is. I think it's about, and that enables more and more people to participate in the campaigning process, folks that may not be comfortable knocking on doors or making phone calls. And that's what really is the powerful part of that. It's the multiplier effect of getting as many people involved and engaged in changing our state as possible.
The filing deadline for next year is January 30th. You anticipate a busy few weeks ahead?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're talking to folks every single day who are interested in running, who want to know what that means, who want to know what kind of support and help we can provide. And so we're really excited. I think you're going to see some amazing candidates stand up and volunteer to put themselves forward to lead this state.
Ben Self, the new chairman of the Kentucky Democrats, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back in a moment. We're going to hear from WKYT Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey about his prediction for the winter, coming up on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back now to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Anybody waking up in Kentucky this morning, you can feel that winter is on its way. There's little doubt about that. And Chief Meteorologist Chris Bailey puts together a look ahead at the winter, makes a big prediction, and you have done that this week.
And by the way, just 40 degrees colder feeling this morning than yesterday. So typical Kentucky weather, right?
The wind is blowing, right?
It is blowing. And you know, this weekend kind of the winter ahead in a nutshell, with big temperature swings that are going to take place across not only Kentucky, most of the eastern half of the country. And, you know, we put together this winter forecast. I've been doing this now for roughly 16 years, I think. We had a great run last year. Old man Winter decided, I'm going to throw a little gut punch.
Got a little warm.
Got a little warm, got a little toasty, got a little snowless last year. So you know what this year is going to be? It can only get colder and snowier, right?
Well, that's right.
I mean, it really cannot get any warmer than that.
That is true.
As we, come off of last year, which kind of bucked the trend of the past decade.
So what does it look like? How do we start out?
All right, well, let's show you. Look at the headlines here that we've got for you to show where we are going. Hey, colder and snowier than last year,
All
Bill.
right.
I know that is a shock, but here's what I'm expecting for the winter as a whole, and I'm talking about December, January, February, early March. Near normal temperatures, but it's not going to be one of those just wall-to-wall, completely normal winters. You're going to have some periods of extreme cold, especially centered on the first half of the winter. Second half of the winter, things are going to turn milder. And when I say that, I'm talking about in relation to normal. Of course, February is milder than January by average standards. We know that, but in regards to the actual temperatures for those given months, I think February is going to end up being a warm one. And all that back and forth, Bill, should lead to above normal snows. But you see the two things lurking there at the bottom. Increased threat for some ice, and late into February and March, we may get that severe weather season started a little early this year.
Well, and when you're in that transition, when that starts in February, you're really always under that threat when you're riding that line on the temperatures, that ice threat, and then the possibility with those sudden changes, you get the rough storms.
And anytime you throw, ice around here,
you don't like to hear
that.
You
go back to, January of 09. You go back to February of 03 for those major ice storms that we had.
They were rough.
That February 03, we never want to repeat that again.
Let's not have that.
We're overdue, though, for an ice event.
What are the trends that are driving things this year?
Looking into the Pacific Ocean, you've got a weak La Nina that is developing. It's the equatorial Pacific waters that are a little colder than normal. Now, last year they were a little colder than normal too, and you're thinking, okay, then why are we going to be colder this year than last year? It's all about the placement of those waters. Last year, those waters were in the central Pacific. This year, those cooler waters are more centered off the coast of Peru into the eastern side of the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific is the biggest weather driver that we have. It's the biggest, baddest body of water to influence our weather.
When we get pretty good snows in Kentucky, typically does that start as a low pressure over the Gulf that brings the moisture, and then there's some cold at the same time?
It does. We typically have two good snow tracks around here. One, the clippers. We haven't had clippers the past couple of winters. Those systems that dive in out of Canada, maybe kind of round the bend across Tennessee, and north of that you get, those 1 to 3 or 2 to 4 inch snows. We haven't had those in a while.
Let's look at your snow prediction.
Check this out. Normal for Lexington, by the way, is about 15 inches. So this isn't anything that is too crazy. It's a little above normal, but you notice I've got southeastern Kentucky. They average more snow than we get in central Kentucky, obviously in the mountains. I think they're going to do pretty good this year on a northwesterly flow because the Great Lakes are warmer than normal, and the winds come down the length of Lake Michigan, picking up some of that lake moisture, deposits it downstream, and that's where we are. And I think this is a slightly above normal snowfall winter. And last year, Bill, we looked at some numbers that were just a little under this, and I said, all right, if I'm gambling on this, how bettors will set an over or an under?
Exactly.
I said last year, if this is going to bust, it'll bust on the under. This year, I think if the forecast numbers are off, it may be because we go over those.
They're, 12 to 14. We were getting big enough snows that just one of them could make up that total, right?
We had 3 of those that made up those totals in each event in 11 months. From February of 15 through January of 16. February, March, and then again in January of 16.
So we don't see that kind of setup right now.
No, is it out of... At any winter, that's at least a possibility. There are some winters where you have a better chance of it happening. This winter, the chances are a little lower of an extreme snowfall event like that, but maybe a little higher for a lot of these 1 to 3 inch snows coming through here. This winter to me is more similar to the winter of 13-14. If you remember that one, it was pretty cold, it was pretty snowy, but we never had the big one. It was about every 3 days you got an inch of snow. 2 days later, you got an inch of snow.
It never quit.
It never quit. Exactly right.
Right.
January ended up being the coldest. And you look at that breakdown, I think January, in relation to normal, is going to be the coldest. And then February may wind up with more thunderstorm days than snow days.
Yeah, they could be interesting. Maybe an early spring.
Could be.
We'll
It could
All
be,
right.
and especially with that severe season.
Thanksgiving travelers this week. A lot of folks will be out there on the roads. What do you think?
It's going to be cold. Right now, it looks mainly dry until we get deeper into that weekend. Could be a East Coast winter storm developing next weekend, roughly about a week from now.
Always something to watch.
I
isn't
know. It keeps it interesting, doesn't it?
Keeps you employed.
It does.
Right?
I like that.
Well, that's a good thing. Chris, always appreciate you taking a little time out.
My pleasure.
We
Always
appreciate
having
that
fun
very
with you,
much.
buddy.
And we want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. Reminder that we're here bright and early for WKYT this morning. We begin at 4:30. Chris, of course, has the shift after that.
That's right. We bring up the rear.
We see each other every day, though. He gets here before I leave. So
Ships passing in the night.
Exactly. Again, thank you for joining us, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.